a news piece of news, stimulus that works. In Germany, one of the packages is that to give consumers the equivalent of $2,500 for those who want to buy new cars. You don't give the money to automakers. No, you give it to the consumers, assuming they are needy. If they are the new car, therefore, or at least by some measure, they are somehow needy, at least more needy than the automakers as big corporations. And the result was very surprising. More sales have occurred, and even Opel, if you have heard about Opel, there has been so many issues about bankruptcy and that stuff. Opel have now reconsidered continuing some of their plans rather than closing them. So it worked. If you allocate money to the needy, to the consumers, that would give you more results than giving the money to those corporations. And we have seen what happened when money was given to AIG. It didn't go to the needy, to the customers. It went to the big creditors and to bonuses to the pockets of those who caused the collapse and the crisis itself. So that's not the right way to allocate. It's very strange that in economies with very bright economists and very advanced capabilities, they are thinking in this manner that is very, very strange. So let me conclude. I'm sorry I took that long.
Thank you, Dr. Sami, for a very interesting lecture, a very informative lecture and very insightful lecture. It's time for questions and answers. I'm sure there are many questions lurking at the back of your minds. We have about 25 to 30 minutes left, and we will proceed in a sequence. We'll take the questions first, as usual. The sequence for today, let me announce. First, we'll take questions from Durham University, followed by Imam Azza University, Lebanon, followed by Mahe, UK, followed by IIU, Pakistan, and Kuwait University, number 5. So we'll start with Durham University. May we have your questions, please?
Thank you, Dr. Sami, for the very interesting topic today. My question is, firstly, on the, we know about this crisis, and one of the problem you mentioned is excessive speculation. So my question is, what is that excessive speculation in terms of Islamic, Islamic finance? So how do you define excessive? If you see in many of the, even in the stock exchange, you can buy and sell stocks within within a day, within a minute, within a second, change hands. So what are excessive in that sense? So this has not been defined in many of the transactions that has been created in the conventional system nowadays. Secondly is on the, I bring to the slide on, you mentioned that debt creation should be integrated with wealth creation. I thought earlier you mentioned that debt actually destroys wealth. There's so much debt, and if you look at Islamic, the prohibition of riba, is because you cannot have any excessive amount, put when you give debt. So any amount above that it is considered riba. So I think that is not a tool for any economic or wealth creation. that itself is just a social tool to help people. So I think elimination of that should be the answer in Islamic finance, instead of integrating it with recreation. Even if we minimize it, I thought we should eradicate it totally. And thirdly, I think there's another question. In the I followed the policy that the US government has been taking on this crisis, and one of the policy taken is to print more money to pay off the many debt obligation that they have. So, what is your opinion of this creation of and printing of more money to solve all this problem? Thank you.
There's another question.
Okay, my question is a little bit simple, a little bit following the question from my sister here. So, in your lecture, you mentioned a little bit about the monetary operations. I mean, for the central bank, they printed money to the bank who put their money in the bank, in the central bank. I mean, through the monetary operations, total amount of base money is keep increasing. It is also the source of the derivative transaction, gharar and everything. But in Islam, printing money with no underlying transaction is prohibited. But if we launch this idea to all of the central bank, please don't print money unless there is an underlying transaction. They're gonna ask us back, what is your idea if you prohibit us to print money? So how do we manage the total amount of this money? How do we achieve the inflation target or something like that? And then if we say to them, we're gonna use sukuk, because sukuk the Islamic way to manage the base money, for example. And then they're gonna argue us, the sukuk market is still very tiny. And then, do you have any idea to solve this problem? Thank you.
Finally, I have a question, and it relates to the search for new paradigm. You mentioned that in the West, because of the crisis, they are looking or searching for a new paradigm. And after that, you talked about Islamic economics. The implication was Islamic economics has the answers. My question to you actually is that while the West is looking for answers, trying to get solutions for the problems, it seems that Islamic finance is moving closer and closer to the very system. And if you look at some of the problems you mentioned, you can create the same problems using Islamic instruments. For example, delinking the real economy and the debt through the use of tawarruk. So I am curious, even though we have the principles in Islamic finance, these are not used in practice, and what can be done to make the practice of Islamic finance closer to the principles. Thank you, Dr. Sami.
Shall I wait or? Okay. Answer? Okay. Thank you all for very insightful questions. How to define excessive speculation? That's a very good question. And this is the area of gharar. This is a very challenging area. And in simple words, an excessive speculation happens when the likelihood of loss is greater than or equal the likelihood of gain. That's a very simple rule. All zero-sum games, by definition, all zero-sum games are high-risk games, because at best you have 50-50. And then 50-50 is gharar, because gharar you have to have likelihood of gain is greater than likelihood of loss. If likelihood of loss is greater than or equal to likelihood of gain, you have gharar. So in order to avoid gharar, you have to have likelihood of gain greater by a reasonable margin, of course, than the likelihood of loss. More discussion you will find it on the hedging paper and of course the previous paper. But this is a very very promising area of research, by the way. Of course, we can have gharar in stock markets. It doesn't mean you can have gharar in any market, by the way. Any bubble is by definition gharar, because a bubble is an unsustainable movement in the market. Those who are making money, they are taking a risk that this bubble will crash. But everybody is saying, well, maybe I'll get out of the market before the crash happens. See? So a bubble by design, by definition, if you take a broad view of the bubble, it's a situation when it's an unsustainable position or structure, and therefore likelihood of loss by definition is greater than likelihood of gain. But each one doesn't know when would the bubble crash, so each one is saying, no, let me get in, double my capital position, and then get out. And he thinks that but if he did double, he would say, why not double it again? And therefore, he would continue staying in the market, hoping that before the crash, somehow someone would call him and get him and tell him to get out. Of course, this doesn't happen. So that's for excessive speculation. Now, for debt elimination, well, I don't think that debt elimination is an objective of Sharia. Control of debt is the objective of Sharia, or to minimize debt. Why? Because we know that the sale with a deferred price payment, bay' al-ajil, is unanimously accepted by scholars. Salam, which is the opposite of deferred sale, when you pay upfront and the commodities are delivered in the future, it's another kind of debt, but it's commodity debt, again is unanimously accepted. So it is not elimination of debt, it is the control of debt. You see, it's very easy to go to the extreme, either to have zero debt or unlimited debt. Both extremes are easy. Well, I mean, intellectually, otherwise, practically, they are not easy. But intellectually, you can say, okay, if this give you headache, just take it away. The difficult thing is to find the right balance. And from an Islamic point of view, the right balance is to have for-profit debt integrated and interlinked with the real transactions and wealth creating activities. So I don't think this is true that debt elimination, but debt minimization and debt integration with the real sector. So debt alone is not prohibited. We know that the Prophet ﷺ, he borrowed several times, and actually the Prophet ﷺ, he passed away while he was indebted to a Jew, believe it or not. Yani the Prophet ﷺ توفي ودرعه مرهونة عند يهودي. He borrowed from a Jew and he put his shield as a collateral with that Jew, and the Prophet ﷺ, he passed away. And then Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he came and he paid off the debt of the Prophet ﷺ and got back the shield of the Prophet ﷺ. So debt is not prohibited, but it is it's undesirable. It's better to avoid debt. True, it is better, desirable to avoid debt. This is true, but not to prohibit it altogether. That is not neither practical, by the way, but even from Sharia point of view, this is not accurate. Printing money. Well, this is an issue of whether fiat money is right or wrong. So, of course, if we think that printing money is wrong, khalas, we are over. But even if we allow for printing money, again, we have to be careful how this money is advanced, to whom and on what basis. And if printing money is not is wrong altogether, there is no question about how to print money. Khalas, it is already. But even if we say printing money is okay, then we have to be sure that this money is not delivered to the wrong, in the wrong direction and to the wrong position. Printing money is very essential, and therefore it has to be socially or directed to social objectives, not to be given for for-profit institutions, for-profit sectors, because printing money is only the function of the state, and the state doesn't act for profit. The state acts for social objectives, and therefore we cannot, the state cannot print money for the benefit of the profit sector. That's a misallocation of resources. Since printing money is a social transaction, it has to be directed for social objectives.